Your word is faithful.
Your word is faithful.
Mighty with power.
Mighty with power.
God will deliver me.
God will deliver me.
Of this I'm sure.
Of this I'm sure. Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I know I can stand secure. Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I put my hope in your holy word. I put my hope in your holy word.
I want to thank Brad for an excellent job leading singing for us, and Nathan, all the other men that lead singing for us. But I ask you if you would to take a Bible and open it up to the 15th chapter of the book of John. John chapter 15 is where we're going to begin this morning. We do appreciate everybody that's here. It seems like finally we have everybody that's on vacation that's finally back. We do have still some stragglers that are out gallivanting around the world, but most of our crew is finally back. So it's good to be with each and every one of you. We also have visitors that are still gallivanting around the world, but will eventually be back in their home churches. So we wish you a safe trip back. We don't want you to leave as soon as possible. We wish you a safe trip back, and we hope the next time you're in the area you'll visit back with us. I will never ever forget, as long as I live, ever, the worst sermon I've ever preached in my entire life. I will never forget this moment. I was just short of my 20th birthday. I think I had maybe 2 or 3 sermons under my belt. And I thought it was the hottest thing to hit preaching since literally Paul the Apostle. I thought it was everything. I thought I was the man. And of course, when you're 19 years old and you're preaching, everybody obviously tells you how great you are because everybody wants you to keep preaching. And so I took everything that everybody said, no matter how awful or how misguided it was, I took everything to heart. And I thought to myself, I am the best preacher that has ever walked the face of the earth. There's a little bit of dose of humble pie coming, don't worry. But I think I'd maybe done 3 or 4 sermons under my belt, had those under my belt at that point. And there was a small congregation north of Nacogdoches where I was going to school that me and a few other guys, Zach, somebody else, Shane, had cycled through. They had kind of a rotation of 5 or 6 different people that were cycling through and preaching on various Sunday mornings. And my Sunday morning rolled up. And so being the college guy that I was and thinking that I was awesome, I spent the whole week not preparing for that sermon. To the point that Sunday morning I woke up, and don't worry, in case you're thinking that I still like this, I'm not. Many can attest to that. Spent the whole week not preparing. Sunday morning, waltzed up to my laptop, opened it up, looked for just the most random sermon that I could find, read the title, printed it off, and drove off to Mount Pleasant, or to Mount Enterprise. Pulled up to the New Salem Church of Christ, walked in, sang songs with everybody else, shook everybody else's hand, and got up. Still to this point, having not once actually looked at my sermon. Because I thought, for whatever reason, that I could just get up there and I could just wing it. That's how arrogant I was. And I got up to the front, got up in front of everybody, 15, 20 people staring at me. I did my introduction. I looked at everybody and said, welcome to be here. I looked down, and the title of the sermon was Fig Leaf Use in the New Testament. And as I looked, for the first time, mind you, at this sermon, I noticed everything all of a sudden appearing in Greek. Because I had no idea what he was talking about. I had no idea what the sermon was. And when you're standing up in front of even 10, 15 people and you don't know what you're going to say, that's a very scary feeling. And I learned a lot that day as I rambled throughout the course of that sermon and talked about fig leaves here, I talked about branches here, and talked about all these different things, and then finally said that immortal phrase that every preacher loves saying whenever a sermon isn't really going that well, that stand and sing, you pull that ripcord, you're gone. I learned a lot of lessons that day. And number 1 on that list was, you need to treat every time you stand in the pulpit with the utmost in reverence and the utmost of respect for the one that you're preaching about. So ever since then, that's the major lesson I've learned. Ever since then, I've always tried to treat every sermon with the utmost of respect. I had a very rough day that day. I can go on and on if you want to. We can take me out to lunch. We'll talk about it. But there were a lot of lessons that day. But the respect and the reverence that we need to have for God every time we, approach Him in prayer, approach Him in service, and especially when you get up behind the pulpit to proclaim His Word, you need to have that in the back of your mind. You need to have that respect. But because of that moment, because of that sermon, because of that experience, I have been very hesitant over the last 8 to 10 years to preach about fig leaves. I've been very hesitant to preach about any plant metaphor that's found in the Bible because it brings up a whole lot of bad memories. Even standing here right now, kind of breaking out in cold sweat because I think Howard's about to boo me. It's just a very rough feeling. But the fortunate thing, or the unfortunate thing, depending on how you want to look at it, is you can't really escape plant metaphors in the Bible. As you look throughout the Scriptures, they're literally all over the place. Jesus always uses mountains, He uses lakes, He uses water, He uses people, but He uses nature. And He uses the earth to describe things in ways that maybe we hadn't really thought about them before. And I think you see this a lot, especially throughout the course of the book of John. Throughout the course of the Gospel of John, you have several statements that are commonly typified as the I am statements of Jesus. And what Jesus uses in every one of these seven, some people would put an eighth one in there, but throughout the course of these seven I am statements of Jesus, He characterizes Himself in ways that are relatable for people. If you were to ask yourself the question, what is Jesus, or who is the Messiah? What's His purpose? What's His task? What's His occupation? You can see the I am statements of Jesus as being these types of metaphors that describe that. So first and foremost, in the book of John, He describes Himself in chapter 6 as saying, I am the bread of life. Now that had a whole lot of controversy in the moment. In John chapter 6, when people heard the phrase, I am the bread of life, they kind of were wondering about that. Is He speaking about cannibalism? How is it possible for us to eat His flesh and drink His blood? Those were the conversations that were happening there. But Jesus was using that metaphor to describe the imbibing of Him that we need to have within ourselves. Just as He is, so we are. His lives, our lives, they're all the same thing. We need to be an extension of who He is. You can see later in John the 8th chapter, Him saying the phrase, I am the light of the world. He mentions Him being literally a light to a dark space, the world itself. He also mentions in John chapter 10, I am the door of the sheep. Anyone that can come in through me will see the Father and will rejoice with Him. So He describes Himself as the gateway to heaven itself. He describes Him also as the good shepherd. There's where you see those two very close together. He also mentions, I'm the resurrection and the life. He also mentions in John the 14th chapter, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But the most immortal one, or the most pertinent one that we're going to be discussing this morning is the last one. And it's found in John the 15th chapter, verse 1, when He says, I am the vine, and ye are the branches. One of the things that you see throughout the course of all seven of this, and one of the things that all seven of them have in common, is all of them consist of Jesus relating Himself to individuals. He doesn't talk about groups of people. He talks about the church, obviously, at large, but He talks about it individuals. He says, I am the good shepherd, and you are the sheep. I am the shepherd, you are the sheep, individuals. And so when He mentions up here in John the 15th chapter, talking about Himself, the true vine, He mentions right after that, I am the true vine, and ye are the branches. You are extensions of who I am. And when we ever wonder about that question, what does it mean to be a Christian? It literally means to be an extension of who Jesus is in the first place. John chapter 15, starting in verse 1, we see this carried out throughout the course of this section. John chapter 15, starting in verse 1, listen to what He says here. He says, I am the true vine, my Father is the vine dresser, and every branch of me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. For you are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit unless it itself abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Notice this repetition of this phrase. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and cast them in the fire, and they are burned. Verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love. For if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments, and so abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full. You have to understand the scene that we're dealing with here. In John the 15th chapter, this is not a scene that's unfamiliar to a lot of us. When you read these sections, you think, well, it's all kind of happening in this abstract space. But in John the 15th chapter, it's very clear what's going on at this point. Starting in John the 13th chapter, going to the end of chapter 16, Jesus is in the upper room with His disciples, having the last conversation that He would have with them, at least as a group, before He would be led away to be crucified. And as He's going through various things, in chapter 13, He washes their feet. Chapter 14 talks about heaven, gives them hope, talks about the Comforter. Chapter 15, He talks about, I am the vine, and ye are the branches. And by saying this, as we just talked about, He's describing them as being extensions of Himself. Abide in me, as I also have abided in my Father. This is something I think we lose track of for whatever reason. In today's world, and I don't know when this started, I don't know how this came about, but for whatever reason, the designation Christian has become more and more a cultural symbol. It's a measure of what you are as a person rather than what you believe. And you hear always people saying, well, I'm a Christian. They describe it just like they would any other demographic. I'm a white, male, middle-aged, Texan Christian. And Christian is just another line in the demographic of who they are. But when you think about what Jesus talks, the term Christian is not regarded as something that you give yourself. Think about that for a second. It's not something that you give yourself, per se. It's something that people look at you and identify you as. Keep in mind, in Acts the 11th chapter, verse 26, it said the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. And what people saw whenever they observed these Christians, what they saw was this is a group of people that have a mindset, that have a philosophy, that have a theology that is similar to what we saw with Christos, with Jesus the Messiah, Jesus Christ, that we heard about. And because these people adhere to the same teachings that Christos talked about, they are called Christians. It's something you are called, not necessarily something you call yourself. But it all stems from this, no pun intended, this idea of abiding in His Word, abiding in who He is. If you were to flip a few chapters back, look at John the 12th chapter. John chapter 12, you go a couple of chapters back. Jesus talks about this extension a little bit more, right before He picks up with this upper room scene. In John chapter 12, starting in verse 48, He says, "He who rejects me and does not receive my sayings has the one who judges him. The word I spoke is what will judge him at the last day. For I did not speak on my own initiative, but the Father Himself who sent me has given me a commandment as to what to say and what to speak. I know that His commandment is eternal life. Therefore the things I speak just as the Father has told me." Notice the extension that Jesus gives Himself here. He talks about in plain English, or Greek, however you want to look at it. He talks about in plain writing in John the 12th chapter that He is an extension of the Father. Not that He's a lower person, not that He's not God in the flesh, as some people would attest to, but that He has the continuity between the Father, through Him, and now to the apostles. And just as the apostles have it, or just as He has had it, so the apostles have it. When we abide in God's Word, when we abide in His teaching, we're not just abiding in the teaching of Jesus Christ, this carpenter who existed 2,000 years ago in the flesh. I'm not minimizing the fact that He's God by any means. But we are extensions of the Father before Him. We are extensions of who the Father is. We're extensions of Jesus Christ. The continuity of teaching that goes all along the essence of what truth is. And we are extensions of who He is. We're extensions of everything about Him. What He's not saying, and this is where I think people get off track when they talk about John 15. What He's not saying by any stretch of the imagination is, I am the vine, and every group that you as apostle will start are the branches. That's not what He's saying. He's not saying, I am Christianity, I am the hub, I am the central figure, I'm the vine. And every group that you start, those are various offshoots and branches of Christianity. And you see people say that at various points in time when they talk about this unity and diversity idea that people want to bring forward. They say, well, Jesus is the vine, but Catholicism is one branch, Baptist faith is another branch, Lutheranism is another branch, and you have Calvinism as another branch. You have all these different branches. And what He's not saying when He says, I am the vine and ye are the branches, is whatever groups you start, those are the branches. If there was any doubt about that, you can see the explicit condemnation that Paul gives in the first 3 chapters of the book of 1 Corinthians about this splintering that people do. But when He says, just as He did with the other ones, I'm the vine and you are the branches, He's speaking to individuals. And it all goes back to this idea of abiding in His Word, abiding in what God says. So ask yourself the question, what does it mean when He says, I'm the vine and you're the branches? There's this idea that some people have. Actually jump a few chapters further to John 17 chapter. John chapter 17. There's an idea that some people have, keeping with this unity and diversity idea, that truth is subjective, and whichever truth you bring forth, whatever truth you bring forth, all of them fall under the reign of humanity, and so they all have to be true. But Jesus has a very strict definition of what truth is. In John the 17th chapter, starting in verse 17, listen to what He says here. This is part of His high priestly prayer. John chapter 17, starting in verse 17. He says, sanctify them in the truth, for thy word is truth, talking about God. As you sent me into the world, I have also sent them into the world. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they themselves also may be sanctified in truth. I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those also who believe in me through the word, that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. Sometimes John 17 is neglected, and I don't know why. But what these passages teach us, where John 17, especially 17 through 21, we just read, typifies what unity is. And people talk about unity. We're united. We have these things in common. But unity, according to John chapter 17, is boiled up into a subheading of truth. If you want to be unified with Christ, you speak what He spoke. If you want to be unified with other Christians, you speak what Christ spoke. And so unity, according to Jesus in John chapter 17, is not possible unless we collectively abide underneath truth, hide behind the cross, live in what He talks about, preach what He says. Because if we don't abide in truth, we're not abiding in really anything. Think about this, for instance, and this is a little bit of an idea that people have sometimes. Let's take some of the concepts that people try to put forth. And these are all sorts of hot-button issues. You could talk about baptism, you could talk about homosexuality. There are all these different hot-button issues that people will put forth as doctrines of their faith. And what I want you to notice as we go through these, we'll only go through a couple, what I want you to notice is the diversity of opinions that people have about a very core principle that you see within Scripture. Look at Acts the 17th chapter. Acts chapter 17. It'd be easy to go with baptism or homosexuality. I would take something that maybe we don't talk about a whole lot. Acts chapter 17, not we, but maybe the world doesn't see as a hot button issue. Acts chapter 17, starting in verse 30. As Paul is finishing up his sermon that is speaking to all the different philosophers on Mars Hill, he has this to say starting in verse 30. And this is how he finishes it. This is the punctuation. He says, therefore, having overlooked all these times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent. Well, why, Paul? Because verse 31, He has fixed a day in which He will judge the world in righteousness through a man whom He has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising Him from the dead. What you have here in Acts chapter 17 and verses 30 and 31 is a core, foundational, fundamental Bible teaching known as Judgment Day. And what Jesus, or what Paul is speaking rather in Acts 17th chapter is, there is going to be this day at some point in the future, the hour that no one knows, but there is going to be this day in the future at some point when God will take all of humanity and He will judge them. You see this in Matthew 25, the sheep on one side, the goats on the other. But He will judge all of humanity. And that seems rather self-explanatory. When you read Scripture, you just read it and think to yourself, well, of course it's going to happen. But the diversity of opinions about this subject and whether or not this subject will even happen is remarkable. Think about, for instance, I tried to take a smattering across the board, what's called Christendom. The Jehovah's Witnesses will attest that Judgment Day will be a period of 1,000 years during which humans will have the opportunity to regain what Adam and Eve lost. If you were to look up what Jehovah's Witnesses teach about Judgment Day, this is what they would say. It seems a little far off, at least to my tiny little brain, but this is nevertheless what they believe as a collective group. Look at this. The Baptists, via one of their most prominent spokesmen, which is Lehman Strauss, he says, not all men will be judged at the same time and place. Well, that's interesting, according to Acts chapter 17. Not all men will be judged at the same time and place. There are 5 future judgments. The judgment seat of Christ, the judgment of the gathered Israel, the judgment of living nations, the judgment of fallen angels, and the judgment of the unbelieving dead. All of those are very interesting, by the way. When he goes into them, all of them, in my understanding of the Bible, are wrong, but that's what he believes. Catholicism takes a much more, as you would imagine, eloquent stance towards it, but you can see a lot of premillennial ideas in it. It says the Scriptures, and this is taken from their main book, and the main book is escaping me at least at the moment. But he says the Scriptures mention certain events which are to take place before the final judgment. These predictions were not intended to serve as indications of the exact time of the judgment, for that day and hour are known only to the Father, and will come when least expected. They were meant to foreshadow, I missed that last phrase, they were meant to foreshadow the last judgment and to keep the end of the world present to the minds of the Christians, without, however, exciting useless curiosity and vain fears. There's some truth in that. Because when you read Matthew 24 and 25, that's more or less a little bit of what he's saying, especially as it pertains to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. But he goes further, at least this goes further, to talk about these events that are going to happen. It mentions a general preaching of the Christian religion, a conversion of the Jews on a mass scale, the return of Enoch and Elijah, which is foreign to me, a great apostasy, the reign of the Antichrist, extraordinary perturbations of nature, universal conflagration, trumpet of resurrection. And what Catholicism teaches is at Judgment Day, or before Judgment Day happens, all these different things are going to erupt before that day. Rather than it just being, as Acts chapter 17 talks about, a day in which he will judge the living and the dead, all these different religious groups have very specific ideas as to what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, or even if it's going to happen in the first place. Now what I don't want to do, and this is very easy at this point in time, what I don't want to do by any stretch of the imagination is to talk about how wrong these viewpoints are. I do believe they're wrong. I make no bones about that fact. But what I really want us to look at least especially with these points, is the diversity of opinion that exists within them. And if somebody's saying, if the universal opinion is that Jesus is the vine and Catholicism is a branch, that the Baptist faith is a branch, and the Jehovah's Witness faith is a branch, then it's a self-defeating argument because they don't even agree. If you want to have unity, according to John chapter 17, everybody has to be bound up under truth. And where truth, where harmony, where fact, where unity is present, diversity of foundational doctrinal opinions cannot, or differences of foundational doctrines cannot be present. Maybe I should have said that a couple times in practice days. And people would argue, especially when they look at something like this, people would argue, well, what's the point? Why does the idea of Judgment Day matter? And there are things that we don't need to be agreed upon. For instance, we're going through a building expansion. We're going to be starting in a couple of months. There could be a universal disagreement that the fact that the color of the carpet should not be blue. I'm personally partial to blue. But I know Travis hates blue. Reminds him of some bad memories in his past. Maybe he likes red for whatever reason. I don't know. It's very bloody to me. But maybe he has a difference of opinion. That doesn't matter. But when we talk about foundational doctrine, there needs to be an agreement on that, especially stuff like Judgment Day. Because if we have, as one of them mentions, if we have this 1,000-year period where we can get our lives right with God, then why should I bother with it right now? Why should I bother with getting my life right now if I have a 1,000-year period to get my life right? It matters what we believe on doctrine. And it matters that there's unity present with those types of things. And the simple fact that there's so much disagreement amongst these foundational doctrinal matters means that it's not Jesus is the vine and every denomination is a branch. It's a self-defeating argument in and of itself. If you are inside the vine, ladies and gentlemen, if you are inside the vine of God, you will and I will abide in His Word. It doesn't get any clearer than that. In 1 John chapter 4, for instance. 1 John chapter 4. Listen to what John has to say here. 1 John chapter 4. And I love reading John. Obviously, it's the same writer as the Gospel of John. No doubting that there. But in 1 John chapter 4, starting verse 1, listen to how blunt John is when he addresses these types of topics. 1 John chapter 4, starting in verse 1, he says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God." Why? Because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know that the Spirit of God, for every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. That's a very anti-Gnostic teaching. The Gnostics taught that He didn't come in the flesh. Verse 3, that every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that is coming, and now is already in the world. You are from God, little children, have overcome them, because greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. Notice the dichotomy. Verse 6, we are from God. He who knows God listens to us, but he who is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. John does something not only in his Gospels, but he does it in his epistles, that the world today shudders at. And that is to create a very clear defining line between people who are Christians and people who are not Christians. That's the least politically correct thing you could ever say in this world. The idea that simply because you say that you're a Christian doesn't actually mean that you're a Christian. And when we make Christianity this cultural mark, that oftentimes gets lost. Who are you to say, after all, that I'm not a Christian? Who are you to say that I don't believe in God? I go to church twice a year. I give my money sometimes, maybe every decade. I pray every 100 years. So who are you to say that I'm not a Christian? And yet John in 1 John chapter 4 draws a very clear defining line that there are people who say they're Christians that are not, and there are people who say they're Christians that are. Our fundamental fact with both of those is the simple reality that just because you call yourself a Christian, just because I call myself a Christian, does not mean that I actually am. And there's going to be a rude awakening for a whole bunch of people on Judgment Day who thought they were Christians. If you remember that grand scene in the book of Luke, when Judgment Day happens, there's another time when it happens. Luke's, I think chapter 7, chapter 11, one of those two, But there are going to be a lot of people who will show up to Jesus, show up on Judgment Day and say, Lord, did we not cast out demons? Did we not do all these wondrous works in your name? Did we not do all these great things for you? And do you remember what Jesus is going to say to those people? Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. What I don't want to do with this point, and this is something that we don't oftentimes do because we don't think about it. But what I don't want us to do at this point is think that this is an us versus them game. That everyone in here is a Christian because we're here, and everyone out there is not a Christian because they're out there. I don't want to have this us versus them mentality. Because the truth of the matter at this point is relevant for every single one of us. If I say, and I stand up here, now going on 8 years, every Sunday, not every Sunday, but most Sundays, and say that I am a Christian, and I go out there and I don't abide in His words, then I am not a Christian. And that's the simple reality of this. If you're here for 20, 30, 50 years, and you attend church faithfully, you pray all the time, you read your Bible, and then you go out and have some far-off belief about doctrinal matters, that's just crazy. And you live your life like the devil, and the whole basis for your reality is not rooted in Scripture, then you're not a Christian. And that's a very unpolitically correct thing to say. But John held nothing back when he talks about that. John we oftentimes associate as being this kind of meek, mild-mannered man. Never forget the fact that he was called by Jesus as a son of thunder. And you can see the delineation of 1 John chapter 4. The sad reality of the situation is it does not matter what I call myself. It matters what God calls me. And if I am a Christian, if I'm abiding in His vine, if I'm living life inside the vine, then I'm going to abide in His words. On the flip side, I am also going to produce much fruit. Just as ironclad as the argument is that you cannot live inside His vine if you don't abide in His words, the opposite of the secondary point is true as well, that you cannot abide in His vine and not grow much fruit. And this is absolutely something that we need to look and resent. Because there are people in this world that for whatever reason have been Christians. And I don't mean like they just call themselves Christians. They are there, they're abiding in His words all day long, but they haven't grown. And I don't just mean they don't evangelize. That's oftentimes the argument that we make. I don't just mean that they don't evangelize. I mean that they don't grow. There are Christians that I've met that are in their 70s and 80s that if you ask them, nobody here in case anyone was starting to get worried, but there are Christians that are in their 70s and 80s that I've met that cannot tell you why baptism is necessary for salvation. They believe it. They can point to a couple of verses, but there's not a lot of depth in that. And there's not a lot of understanding. If someone says, well, what do you think about this? Conversation stops. And the point is, as Christians, we always need to be growing. It's not a good idea. It's not a good suggestion. It is a certainty based on what we're reading in John the 15th chapter. Look at me, if you would, at Matthew the 21st chapter. Matthew chapter 21. Matthew chapter 21. This is an interesting story in the life of Jesus because it seems to go against what He's all about. The story just seems very atypical of who He is. And there's not a ton of explanation, at least for our modern ears. Obviously, they understood at the time, but there's not a huge amount of explanation for us. But there's some things in here that are very applicable, I think. Actually, all of it is applicable. I didn't mean to say that some of it isn't. Matthew chapter 21, starting in verse 18. It says, Now in the morning when He was returning to the city, He being Jesus, He became hungry. And seeing a lone fig tree by the road, He came to it and found nothing on it except leaves only. And He said to him, No longer shall there be any fruit from you. It's not a curse, by the way. That's a condemnation. It's a matter of judgment. And at once the fig tree withered. Seeing this, the disciples were amazed and asked, How did the fig tree wither all at once? And Jesus answered and said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to that mountain, Be taken up and cast in the sea, it will happen. Verse 22, all things that you ask in prayer, believing you will receive. I'll be the first one to tell you that I don't understand every single aspect of verses 20 through 22. I don't understand every single thing about what Jesus is teaching at that point. But I do understand the context and understand that moment enough that what Jesus is emphasizing is the growth in the apostles. The apostles, by and large, when we look at them in the Gospels, were not people that were exceptionally deep in their faith. They were obviously attached to Jesus. They understood some of the things they were saying, but they still had a whole lot of things that needed fixing. And when they saw this fig tree that just completely withered right before them, and they saw Jesus' reaction to them, on some level the question is, why did Jesus curse the fig tree in the first place? Why is Jesus walking up to this tree? Did He curse it, cause it to wither? What did the fig tree do to Him? But when you look at the story, you think back, you step back a second, look at it. The reason that Jesus cursed the fig tree was because it didn't have any fruits. Now, why is that a big deal? Why is that pertinent in Scripture? Because the point of that fig tree was to bear fruit. And a fig tree that doesn't bear fruit is taking up the nutrients, it's taking up the soil, but it's not accomplishing the purpose that it's meant for. And I think too many times as Christians, we're not accomplishing the purpose that we were meant for. We're here. We read our Bible, we pray, we give every Sunday, we talk to people every once in a while with the gospel, but we're not really growing in regards to our faith. And we're fooling ourselves into thinking that we're some super Christian, that we're on our fast track to heaven because we show up here every Sunday, when in reality there's no depth to our faith. And the question is, as Jesus gets closer and closer to your life, will He find fruit there? Will He find that you're fulfilling the purpose that you were meant to be? Not in some abstract, Zen type way, where you need to sit there for hours and hum in order to find a purpose. But are you growing as a Christian? That's mine this time. No. Are you growing as a Christian? And if the answer is no, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Look back, if you would, to the book of Lamentations. Look at Lamentations. If you never look at Lamentations, we need to look at it right now. Lamentations is, as you can tell from the name of the book, a very depressing book. But it's depressing because it talks about the very destruction that was prophesied about for a couple hundred years. In Lamentations chapter 3, part of the reason that Jeremiah is so sad is he's looking back at the destruction. The whole time he's thinking to himself, this could have been avoided. But I want you to notice specifically what he says about this avoidance. In Lamentations, the 3rd chapter, look at verses 39 and 40. Lamentations chapter 3, starting in verse 39. Jeremiah writes in verse 39, why should any living mortal or any man offer complaint in view of his sins? In other words, why is anybody able to look at the destruction and think to themselves, why did this happen? This wasn't supposed to be us. We didn't deserve this. Why can anybody say that? Look at verse 40. Let us examine and probe our ways, and let us return to the Lord. I would imagine there will be on Judgment Day, just as there were then, a whole lot of people who are looking at the destruction that is imminent and thinking to themselves, why me? Why am I being sent off apart from God? Why am I the one that's being destroyed? The reality of it is because you're not taking stock of your life. You're not examining your life. You're not looking into your life and thinking to yourself, and I'm not looking into my life and asking myself, am I abiding in God? Because if that answer is no, then I need to do something about it. And too many times we don't. Too many times we just go on our life and forget about all of it. I'm not just talking about evangelism, I'm not just talking about the public service, I'm talking about life as a whole. The branches, ladies and gentlemen, cannot bear fruit unless they're abiding in the vine of Jesus Christ. So many times in my life, I have tried to attach myself to things and to vines in this world that don't produce fruit. I've tried to attach myself to the pleasures of this world, tried to attach myself to things that are fleeting, and at the end of all of those, I found that there's nothing at the end of that rainbow. There's nothing at the end of that vine. And if I truly want to bear fruit, something that's meaningful in this world, then I will attach myself to Christ and let myself live within His vine for forever. The whole book of Ecclesiastes is one big experiment that Solomon goes through to ask himself, is there anything worthwhile in this world that has lasting significance that I can do and accomplish in this world? And the answer at the end of all of that is no. Am I inside the vine? Am I living my life attached to Him? Because if I'm living my life attached to Him, not only will I bear much fruit, but I'll also be stronger as a result. Matthew chapter 7, one final verse as we end this morning. Matthew chapter 7. In Matthew chapter 7, look at verse 21. Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 21. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. And many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. There will be, as we just mentioned, a whole lot of people on Judgment Day that will stand there looking to God, thinking that they produce fruits. And in reality, the fruit that they produced was not godly at all. It was something completely polar opposite. It was something completely foreign to that. And because of that, Jesus looks at them in Matthew the 7th chapter and says, I do not know who you are. That's not to say that these people won't accomplish anything in their lives. That's not to say that these people will not become CEOs, that they won't become famous baseball players. It's not to say that they won't accomplish a whole lot of things. But at the end of the life, all of those things that they accomplish outside the vine will eventually be burned up. And will eventually be useless. And you can see immediately after this, starting verse 24, as Jesus continues, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew, and slammed against that house, and it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine does not act on them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew, slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Jesus puts forth an object lesson immediately after he talks about these false teachers who weren't accomplishing anything, by saying there are groups of people who will put their life on Christ, who will build their life inside the vine, who will be steadfast against everything. And there will be other people who hear these words that God has to say, will count them as lost, count them as secondary, build their house on something that's fleeting. And when the storms of life come, their house will be destroyed. And at the end of their life, they'll look back at everything they've accomplished. Maybe they've been president. Maybe they won the MVP in baseball 6 years in a row. These are my mind's at. Maybe they've accomplished so much, amassed $1 trillion worth of wealth. And at the end of their life, they'll look back and think to themselves, just as Solomon did at the end of Ecclesiastes, what did I really accomplish with my time here on earth? Christians don't have to say this. People who abide in the vine and people who live their life inside the vine never have to say this. The great novelist Nathaniel Hawthorne was famous for a whole bunch of works. Living in the mid-1850s in Salem, Massachusetts, he accomplished a whole lot of his works, but what's little known about him is that he accomplished a lot of those much later in life. Solomon, and I don't mean to say that he's old by any stretch of imagination, but Nathaniel Hawthorne didn't start really writing, and didn't really make a profession of writing until he was the second half of his life. I'm not going to put a number on it because I can see everyone waiting for that. But Nathaniel Hawthorne, for the first 30, 40 years of his life, was just like you and I, just a regular person going about his job. And one day he found himself in the customs office in Salem, Massachusetts, processing various things. And because of the political arrangements of the day in the mid-1800s, he eventually lost his job. And he lost his job that was, I think, $1,500 a year, but it was the only thing that he had to really let his family live off of. And he was terrified, and he talks about it. People talk about how he walked home that day and was just despondent, how he couldn't understand how he was going to support his family. And he walked through the front door and he saw his wife standing by the fireplace. And he told his wife what had happened, I lost my job. And his wife, as a perfect wife should, was very supportive. And turned to him and said to Nathaniel Hawthorne, now you have time to write that novel you've been talking about. That novel that Nathaniel Hawthorne had talked about for years, but had never really done because he was scared. Ended up being the star of it. And within 10 days had sold 2,500 copies, which was massive for distribution in the 1800s. It's the first time that you ever saw a mass market paperback just explode. And Nathaniel Hawthorne became the great literary giant that he was because he lost his job. The one thing that he thought he needed more than anything else. But all he really needed was the support and the strength. It came from one of the people that did most of his life. And as you see the apostles up in the upper room with Jesus in John 15th chapter, and Jesus says, abide in the vine. You can almost hear the apostles that are listening to this, hearing exactly what they need to hear. You're going to go through hard times. And you're going to go through some really dangerous trials. But I will always, always, always be with you. We need that encouragement in our lives. And living life inside the vine lets us do things and accomplish things that have an eternal value, rather than things that will eventually be destroyed with the end of the world. And if you're here this morning, you've lived your life for your own sins, your own pleasures, your own lusts, and you think that these are going to accumulate something, I hate to spoil the ending of your life, but at the end of it, everything's going to be destroyed. Everyone's going to be burned up in fervent heat, and everything that we have spent a lifetime accumulating will eventually be gone. And then God will ask us the question, just as He did to the one who built multiple barns. Who's going to have all this stuff? What has your life been about? I would encourage you to look to the vine. Look to Jesus. Live your life inside of it. And build a life and a soul that lasts forever. And if we can help you with that anyway, won't you come?
Your word is faithful.
Your word is faithful.
God will deliver me.
God will deliver me.
Of this I'm sure.
Of this I'm sure. Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I know I can stand secure. Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I put my hope in your holy word. I put my hope in your holy word.